Greetings, groovy people. Welcome to the channel. This is Blue Dragon Art, and I am the self-proclaimed Blue Dragon. I am going to be doing a much shorter video than last week. Oh my god, that monster video, while I am very proud of most of it, the audio, oh my god, the audio, like, stuff that I cut out in CapCut was left in, and then the stuff that I added was just kind of added on top, and then, like, I don't know what happened. Like, when it exported, somewhere along the way, some of the audio got, like, kind of offset from the video, and then it cut off my ending, my outro that I always give, so whatever, it's okay. I'll figure out what's going on, or I'll just edit the audio in Audacity and never edit it at all in Capcom until I figure out what's going on. But I digress. This week, I need to do a little bit of a shorter video because I'm going to be working on a video that's going to be maybe a tiny bit longer next week. It turned out that it was going to be longer, so I was like, uh-oh, I better, like, put the brakes on and, like, do something quick this week. So, the topic that we're going to be discussing this week is a compare and contrast of different mediums that I use. Specifically, micron, or technical pens, as I call them, versus dip pens versus brush, whenever you're inking, like, a comic page traditionally. The thing that actually inspired me to do this video is from a forum thread in Tapas from a little while back. And yeah, you heard me. I'm an old head. I'm still on the forums. I will not go over to the Discord. There's too many, I don't know. It's just very intimidating to me, I think. I'm not really good on Discord. I've talked about that before. There's only a few channels that I'm a part of, and even most of those, I just kind of lurk. There's only like 2 or 3 that I'm really actually vocal in at all, and they have to be smaller because it feels more personal, you know what I'm saying? But anyway, I digress. Back on topic. We were doing this, like, one of those memes of, like, sharing a redraw of your old drawings, and I, coincidentally, for the 3rd time, was redrawing the cover art for a Dark Horse chapter, the one that I'm working on right now, which is titled Ceremony. If you don't know what Dark Horse is, it's my free post-apocalyptic magical girl fantasy comic. It's not safe for work, and links are down in the description. It is very, very slow burn because I'm a shit writer. If you want to check it out, though, it's down there only if you're 18 or older, which you should be if you're watching my channel, because I don't target no kids. Sorry. I don't dislike kids, but I don't want them on my channel because I'm an irresponsible adult, okay? Anyhow, so we were doing this meme thing, and, you know, I'm going to put it up here so that you can see what the comparison looks like between roughly 2005 versus 2020 versus 2023 when I redrew this again. And what you might be thinking is, all those years and Blue Dragon's art actually regressed in 2020? What in the flying fuck is up with those drifting eyes? But what I was thinking is, I used a Uniball for the first one. Oh, and then a dip pen for the 2020 version. And then this year I used a brush. The line work really looks very different on all 3 of those. So, okay, yeah, I do notice how bad the anatomy and the hair and everything is. You notice how her hairstyle just got more and more kind of trimmed down each time I did it? Yeah, I realized she looked a little bit ridiculous. But, so anyway, for a while I've been wanting to do like a compare and contrast of what the exact same drawing looks like were I to use different mediums in the same year. That way, you know, like, my skill level is relatively the same, even though I haven't been, like, inking with a brush for very long. So yeah, since Easter was just this past Sunday, and that's very suiting for Kana, who this specific character is fairly religious, at least at the time of the story, you know, what is taking place right now. I decided it would be very suiting for her to be holding a lamb, kind of smash people over the head with the mallet of symbolism, blah, 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 whatever. I'm not very subtle. Sometimes I am, and other times I'm not subtle. Anyway, I thought it would be kind of cute to do this. I also needed some extra art for, like, you know, my patrons and subscribe star. But the lamb reference that I used to look at is down in the description as, like, just, you know, like a citation. But I hand drew it, obviously. You can see me hand drawing it. Okay, so the main point of this video isn't the sketch part. So let's just, here, fuck this noise. We're gonna press the fast forward button. Okay, here we go. Inking. I started with my micron and what I call technical pens. You know, like the felt tip pens or whatever material it is that they use. I think that I will most often use these for detail, small images, When I need to use like a template, you know, like a circle template or something like that, I tend to use like these types of pens instead of like a nib so that the ink doesn't get all over. Sometimes I'll use these for patterns and hatching. In fact, quite often I will use them for making patterns and hatching. Some of these aren't felt tip at all. I'm just kind of calling them that. Like the Micron PN, it looks like it has kind of like a plastic nib of some sort. Dad actually used to have multicolored versions of these for drafting surveying plats. Property line maps is essentially what a plat is. But back before they went fully digital in programs like AutoCAD is what he was using before, before he retired. So yeah, that's the technical garble, but anyway, I think that's why I call them technical pens, since they aren't ballpoint pens and they're not dip pens. And just, to kind of get this out there, as I'm sure y'all already assume, these are my personal taste and observations. Your mileage may vary. What I find applicable to myself may not be something that holds true for you. So this is all my personal pros and cons, but maybe somewhere in this garble of language and words, you might find something that is helpful to you in your own expression with these tools in this medium. So, without further ado, the pros and cons of the pens. You know what? They are great with detail. You can switch up the sizes of your pen depending on how you want to add depth or thickness to your lines. I like the control that I have. That's why I use them whenever I'm doing like something that's smaller than usual, because it's less likely to kind of drip ink everywhere. That's probably more to do with me and my inability to ink properly, but it is a thing that I've had issues with. And it's very helpful to not glob ink all over your paper. You know what I'm saying? Some of the Copics that I have also have like replaceable nibs on the pens, and they can also be refilled. So that can produce a little less waste and also save money rather than having to like buy an entirely new pen. They also dry very quickly, nearly immediately, though they can smudge if they're still a little wet and you run your hand over it. But they will dry quicker than something like India ink or Sumi ink. They're pretty good for even flow, for stippling or hatching. Although sometimes if you do go too fast, it does get a little, I don't know the terminology for it, a little bit grainy perhaps is how I would say that. So yeah, I mean, depending on how you're using them, for the most part, if you're doing something like stippling, which I use them for that quite often, they're really good for that. Hatching too, cross hatching, regular hatching, curved hatching. I don't know all the hatching terminologies. Does anybody else out there know them? But in addition to all this, they're not really all that pricey. You could go into like your local Michael's or Dick Blick. Dick Blick. Okay, I'm sorry, I'm juvenile, y'all. Or your local art supply store, which is what I tend to do first before I go to like the larger named ones. And you can get something like this 4-piece Pitt Fiber Castile artist pen set. It's labeled manga, but I think they have the exact same package with like a different picture for people who want to get the ones that don't have the manga character on them. And they're relatively cheap and they last a reasonable amount of time, especially if you're not like pushing down too hard and taking care of them. You know the drill with pens, y'all. I'm sure you've used a pen before. The Faber-Castell are not refillable or anything, though. I should note that. And not every Copic is refillable either. It really depends on where you're at and what you have access to. Also, for anyone who, cares, most pens like this, like the Microns, and definitely Faber-Castell. I don't know if it's Castile or Castell. I think it's Castell. It's a German company originally. But they are vegan, and in the case of the latter, they're also cruelty-free. Now, just as a quick, caveat, cruelty-free and vegan doesn't necessarily mean that they are sourced ethically, although to my understanding, Faber-Castell, I think, tries very hard to source their stuff ethically, like with people, is what I'm saying, with people. But at the same time, you can only do what you can do. It's hard to kind of figure out all this information and do all the research because, it's hard to get a hold of people to find out exactly what all they do and where they source their shit from. You know what I'm saying? It's also very hard to avoid a lot of things that aren't ethically resourced, which is a whole nother bag of worms, and we're not going to get into that in this video. But I digress. I do want to say, if that is at least something that you are concerned with, such as myself, these are for the most part pretty good to purchase, and I will have links for just like general information down in the description. None of this video is sponsored, by the way. None of it is. No, I wouldn't get sponsored anyway, but just I don't even have affiliate links because I hate Amazon, y'all. I'm deeply insane, but I don't care. Anyhow, let's go ahead and get into the cons. I find that if I'm mixing mediums, sometimes the nibs can dry out or get a little bit clogged and are a bit annoying to clean off. I.e., darn it, I done fucked up and I need to use gouache or my Sakura gel pen or whatever for repairs. But then I go back over and it's like, oh no, it's just reactivated that bottom medium. Oh shit, now it's stuck on the tip of my pen. That's kind of annoying. That's a con. And that's more me. I mean, that's me. Maybe I need to like let shit dry longer, or maybe I just am not, in that case, I will usually, if I've used gouache, I'm probably gonna like wait until it's dried very well and then use the technical pen, or I might try to use like, a dip pen. Anyway, I probably shouldn't even be using my tools like that. But if you were expecting professionalism from me, please lower your expectations now. Here's the bar. There's where they should be. Your expectations. Got her. But additionally, another thing that's like a con, in my opinion, is that I really hate erasing over any of these brands of pens. Maybe there's other brands that are better, but the ones that I use the Copics, I use the Microns, and I use the Faber-Castell. Or Faber-Castell. I'll pronounce it differently every time, y'all. If I've drawn on the Bristol and used these, and I don't use a gum eraser, I use a regular old eraser, the ink is going to lift. It's going to fade. Even when I haven't erased, it's not as deeply pigmented, in my opinion, as using a dip pen or just using another type of ink in general. So it will lift that up if you're erasing over it. And yeah, that can be a problem, because then when I go to scan it in, it will make me have to do more line cleanup digitally, which is a pain in the ass because I use a mouse, and while I'm getting better with the mouse, I'm not like these magical skilled people who put the effort in to make their mouse art look good. I'm just a shit artist, and so I have trouble with the mouse still. Anyway, wow, the noises today, and the noises are on a whole nother level. I am so sorry. Anyway, if you're going to do that, I guess a suggestion is to use the gum erasers, but even then, that doesn't always, depending on how hard you press the graphite in, if you're like me and just full pressure all the time, it's going to be a little harder to erase the graphite. Anyway, that is still a con, though. I don't have any other, really, not that many more complaints. I mean, yeah, having to switch out pens can be a little bit annoying, but really that's like a petty, trivial complaint that really doesn't matter, and I really don't, other than being annoyed because I'm a disorganized idiot, that's really not a complaint on the pen's part, that's more like me. Okay, next up is the next tool that I learned to use, which is the dip pen. So, rule number 1 of inking, before we even get into like the dip pen, you're going to notice that I have really sped up the footage. And that's because unless you have an actual good underdrawing or aren't a shit artist like me, you probably want to make sure that your undersketch doesn't look like complete and total garbage before you start inking. Because I ended up not being happy at all with Kanna's face in this, and decided at the end of doing all this that I was going to draw this fucking thing a 4th time because I was not happy with her face or how I inked it. So, I've gone ahead and spliced in the redraw and the re-ink of this. Again, the underdrawing is pretty important, unless you're good enough to freestyle with ink, which I am not. I am sorry. But this is the second tool that I learned to ink with. I initially used a Speedball brand, I think, and I don't remember what the nib style is, but it looks very similar to a Sanji nib. It's just a little bit, it's not as long. It is a different nib type, but I can't remember what it's called. And then I moved along from that onto the Sanji nib because my fiance picked up the pen from Mitsuwa's in Chicago, or not in Chicago, in Arlington Heights, Illinois. And I fell in love with that type of nib, so that's what I use now. Like, a lot of mangaka will use G-nibs and swear by it. Others will use a different type of pen, but me, I like the Sanji. I don't think it really matters. I think you just got to get used to, like, the angle and stuff, which I'll talk about later on. Not gonna lie, this is still my favorite tool to use, although the brush is really coming up. The brush is the dark horse here. Dark horse. Serious face, though. The brush, I really like using the brush, too, but I'll get into that later. Let's talk about the pros with the dip pens. First off, the varied width, the line weight, I should say, that you can get from a dip pen is just amazing. It's probably why it's my favorite tool to use, to be honest. If you press a little bit lighter, you get that thinner line. If you press a little bit harder, you get a thicker line. And you can kind of undulate the line very smoothly so long as you have control and know what you're doing with it. I won't say that I've mastered this at all, but I'm getting better at it, and it can be very therapeutic. There's a video that I did a couple years ago, just inking my character Shimiko, and I did an hour-long video talking about some kind of personal stuff, and oh man, like the whole time I was doing it, it was just so therapeutic, and the inking part was just really, it just felt so good to do. So that's not really something you can quantify. It's got really nothing to do with the medium or the tool itself, but this is something that I'm kind of thinking about. One of the reasons why I personally really like to ink with a dip pen. There's a very satisfying feel to them, in my opinion. And I really like how it glides across the paper, especially if you've got a nice thick paper like Bristol. But even when I was using the thinner paper, as long as it wasn't a new nib, like the way it just glides across and how deep the black is, regardless of if you're using Sumi ink or if you're using India ink, which I use a Sumi ink now that has like synthetic glue in it. But I've used both mediums, and obviously they're both fine. The other thing that I kind of like is, like, once it's fully dried, if you run your fingers over it just very gently, there's a satisfying texture and bump to it. And if you're going to paint that, or even if you're going to Copic color, the nice thing about that, and this is with Sumi ink if you're going to Copic color, India ink if you're going to use, like, some kind of water-based paint or something like that. Just to let you know. But yeah, the thing that I like about it is, like, since it has a little bit of a depth, it has a little bit of edge, that in a way kind of helps keep your color in the lines. Now, I'll still go over the lines, but it's just something that's very delicate that I find to be very helpful, that the regular pens, the felt point pens, the technical pens, whatever you want to call them, they just don't produce that depth. And also, like, that deep black color. So that's just some things that I find to be, like, a pro of the dip pen. It's pretty good with detail, most detail, actually. And you can also pull out different size pen nibs, just as you can with your regular technical pens or micron pens. I ended up doing that in the later one. I picked out one of my speedball pens that's for finer detail to work on Kana's face, since I knew the Sanji nib wasn't fine enough to do that. You can do the same thing with your dip pens. The other thing is that this type of pen is very good for tapering off. Like if you want to do a special effect such as a beta flash or just a regular flash, if you use a regular pen, it's harder to get that taper. Whereas if you're using the dip pen, you can start by pushing and then just quickly move and then pull it up as you're going, and that will give you that beautiful taper that you're looking for when you're doing like a beta flash or a regular flash effect. Another thing is, personally, I think it's fairly economical. Once you've got the pen itself, I bought nibs for only 12 something off of Deleter.com. I got a 10-pack for 12 something a couple years ago, and I still have like maybe 4 or 5 nibs left. And I haven't even thrown the other ones out because I can still use them. And since I've switched up paper from that thin stuff, I probably will use them now that I'm using Bristol. So the only thing you really have to replace are the nibs and obviously the ink, which you're not going to be throwing out like your plastic pen tube because you don't have a plastic pen tube. So I think it's a little bit, you know, at least for that, it's a little bit more economical than buying a new micron pen every time it runs out, especially if you are a heavy inker. Same thing for like the Sumi ink. I bought that like maybe in 2021. I bought 2 of them. And while I am trying to use up an old Sumi ink that I bought that has like animal product in it, and I don't know what to do with it, so I'm just using it to get rid of it. But like all the same, like it takes me a while to get through the inkwell. So I feel it's fairly economical. It's fairly affordable, depending on where you're at. It might not necessarily be accessible because I have to order this shit online. And if you're living in a certain part of the world or the US, maybe things are harder to like access where you're at. It might be a bit harder for you to find. But you don't have to use the brands that I do. You know, you could go to Michael's and use like, you don't have to use like the Japanese style shit. You can use like the Western style shit. And it all works. It just depends on what you like and what you get accustomed to. So those are some pros. And additionally, if you hadn't figured it out, you can get vegan versions and predominantly cruelty-free versions of this also. Faber-Castell, again, they're the winners. They're like fairly open about discussing their shit. So while I haven't really used those products yet, I do plan on getting some of their ink to see how it works, see how I like it. Otherwise, I'm going to stick with the Zig Kuretake Black Ink 60. That specifically, it's very important that it's the Black Ink 60 because that one uses synthetic ink. One final pro is that these lines won't fade. This color won't fade. I just can't feel like there's some stupid car commercial with the American flag waving, these colors won't fade. Well, the same is true if you're erasing over this type of ink, man. If you're using Sumi or India ink, it's not going to fade like with those microns. So that's a plus. And it'll take a beating. Not that you should beat it, but it will take a beating. If you dumb that high pressure graphite, you can't, within reason, erase and not pull up your ink. Within reason, okay? Within reason. Cons! Oh my god. The cons? The fucking learning curve on dip pens. Holy cow. I would be lying if I said it was easy to get used to this. Like, I've been using these pens for like years now. For years. And before that, I was scared shitless of dip pens. You know why? You know why? I'm gonna fucking flash up this awful mistake that I made. I fucking spilled my ink all over this shitty drawing that at the time I was so incredibly proud of. And like I literally cried. I remember I was in college. I was at my desk. So number one, I was in this fucking dorm. Number one, I was in the dorm and I made this fucking huge ass mess I had to clean up. And number two, which is more important to me, was that I done fucked up this awful drawing of mine that was the pinnacle of my skill at the time. So I was very proud. And I'm proud of the fact that I was proud of it because you should be proud of where you are. Even if you want to get better, don't always shit on yourself. Even your shitty art, you know you'll get better and you got to be proud of that stepping stone. You know what I'm saying? So, I mean, I make fun of my art, my old art, but it's fine. It's fine. Everyone goes through these stages. But yeah, the learning curve, besides that, oh my God, learning the angle that you have to draw on, making sure that you're not poking your pen through the paper, figuring out how hard to press down. I mean, all of that. It's a very intense learning curve that you only can learn through practice and practice and practice. And you're going to make mistakes and you're going to fucking, oh my God, you're going to glob ink. You're going to glob ink. This is why I started tracing onto the thinner paper because I kept fucking up drawings. And I was like, I can't do this again. Although you can. If you've done it once, you can do it again. That was one thing Lavender Town said that really struck me. If you can draw it once, you can do it again. But I started like using the tracing paper specifically so that I could learn without destroying my hard work. And I think there's something valuable in that as well. But you can easily glob droplets onto your paper, or sometimes if your nib is too old, you'll just be drawing along and all of a sudden it'll just fucking glob ink on. If you've overloaded it a little bit, it'll glob ink on you. Really, there's just so much that you need to learn to get accustomed to with it. Once you've learned it, it's very satisfying, but I'm not going to sit here and pretend like it's easy because it's not. You gotta put effort into it. I still have problems today, as you can see in the background, because I globbed some of it. Like, I immediately globbed shit. Like, when I first started, I globbed shit, and I was like, fuck. But it's okay. It's okay. I fixed it with a little bit of gouache later on. And then you clean it up in the computer, and it's like it was never there. It never happened. Yeah. Another thing is learning when you need to get the new nib, when you need to exchange it out. That's kind of a pain in the butt. I hate breaking in a new nib. I really, really hate breaking in a new nib. It's better with the Bristol board, but on the other paper, I was constantly ripping and tearing that thin paper. And I'm not bitching at the paper. It was me. It was me and the new nib. But, you know, good paper is tantamount. Let's just say that. But yeah, that's a con. There's also, like, just the general space you need. Like, microns take up way less space than having to use a dip pen. You gotta have a place to put your ink. You want to make sure that it's in a comfortable place that you're not going to knock it over. And you need water to clean your nib off. And you need a rag. There's things that just kind of take up more space over, like, microns. So that can be an issue if you're not, like, if you don't have, like, the ideal, like, desk situation that can take up space. So that can be kind of a pain in the ass. You got to take care of your stuff. Like, my stuff looks a little messy, but I wipe it off every time I'm done using it. I don't like it to get gross. I mean, it's a little bit gross, but I've had that since before we moved to Oregon, the pen stick, and I'll probably have it for many more years to come just because I really like it. But, I mean, you do have to take care of it a little more. Once you're done with the micron pen, you toss it. I mean, you gotta care for it a little bit, but when you're done, you're done. You toss it. So there's a little bit more, like, care going into, like, your tool when it comes to, like, a dip pen. And there's also, like, the drying time. It takes a lot longer for it to dry. I've already talked about supplies. That can be a little hard to get a hold of depending on where you're at. But of course, you don't have to use the brands that I do. But figuring out what ink, like I know some people swear by Higgins, Black, Magic, whatever ink. And I'm sure it's good ink. But maybe it would be better with, like, the brush. I didn't particularly like it. I thought it was a little bit too thin for what I do. I personally didn't like it, but that doesn't mean the product is bad. Obviously, it's not. It's been around forever. It might be better for other people with different, like, tools. But yeah, finding out which kind of ink that you personally like. What kind of nib. Those can be kind of cons if you're a little bit more impatient and you want to just get started making stuff now. Acclimating yourself to the tool can be a little bit time consuming. Lastly, using brushes to ink your pages. Up until very recently, as in, like, January of this year, I believe, you know, I hadn't really incorporated brushes as actual line work. I've used them for washes and some of my comic work and other things, but I never used it to actually do the line work on my pages. And I knew people did this. I just never, you know, I was like, the nib is good enough for me. But then I watched this Sia Ohm video, and you can check that out. I got the link down in the description, or if I'm not too lazy, I'll put it in the iCard. Usually I'm too lazy, y'all. But up until the point that I saw her video, I really didn't have the incentive or inclination to even give it a try. But after watching her video, I thought, yeah, this might be a little difficult for me to transition, but maybe I should give it a go. I really thought that it was going to be hard for me to move into using brushes, like regarding controlling the width and the flow, but I was actually very pleasantly surprised. It was pretty easy for me, considering, you know, the learning curve that I had with the dip pen compared to the brush. It's similar, but it's also a very different beast, if you get what I'm saying. So yeah, you can get thicker lines. You know, you can change out your brushes, the brush sizes, but even like with some of the medium-sized brushes, you can get a little bit thinner lines if you're not pressing too hard. There's a lot of line variation that you can still get. Yeah, pros. Definitely pleasant to use, smooth, easy to vary the line width, all that I was already covering. I use a couple different size brushes, but for the most part, I use a good medium small, and that can usually handle most of the finer details, unless it's something really small, in which case, you know, I might switch out to like a smaller brush. But yeah, it's pretty good with thicker lines too. Materials are easy to find for me, again, fairly economical. around the same. You know, you might end up using a little bit more ink with the brushes, I think, depending on if you do the naughty and, and dip your brush and nib directly into the inkwell, which I've been told by, well, not told, but I've seen many people say, don't do that because you're going to get bacteria in it. I do it anyway, y'all, because I'm not professional. I use it before it becomes a problem. But anyway, don't do as I do. Do as other people say. But anyway, yeah, aside from that, though, I think it might use a little bit more ink probably than a nib because a brush can retain a little bit more ink. But on the plus side, you're also not going to probably be globbing ink while still being able to use the brush for a little bit longer than you can the pen nib. And if you take care of your line brushes, they will last for a pretty long time. Like, I have brushes, I haven't brought, aside from these that I bought specifically to do this, like even my other paint brushes, I don't do like a ton of painting, but like I've had them since like college. I don't even think I take that good a care of shit, but like I wash them out and I let them dry before I put them back upright. Let them dry before I put them back upright, because if you set them upright when they're still wet, that water will sink down into like the metal and rust and shit and get into like the wooden part. And you don't want that. You don't want that. Just let it dry sideways first and then put it upright. Anyway, that's a different story. It's not got anything to do with this video here. But yeah, you can use pretty much the same materials, same type of paper, same type of ink, same type of rag to gently dry and straighten out your bristles. And if you're erasing lines, guess what? Once it's dried, which a pro is, it dries much quicker than with the dip pen. It also will not really fade the lines unless you're really tearing into it and fucking up the tooth of your paper. So yeah, you can also find synthetic brushes. So that's a plus for me. Some of the cons, you do need to be delicate with your bristles. There's a bit of a learning curve, probably more of a learning curve than I'm letting on, because the dip pen is something that you really have to learn how to control. So maybe if you've never used a dip pen and you jump right into brushes, you might experience something a little different than me, where you're trying to learn how to like vary your weight, and you don't want to push too hard. You really got to be delicate with your brushes. You don't want to go against the grain of the bristles because you're going to fuck up your bristles. You do really have to have a little bit of delicacy with them, or you're going to splay them all out and fuck up your tools and have to go waste more money. You just got to be a little bit more careful, I feel, with them. A little bit more care involved also, even more so, I think, than like the nibs. If you're doing it right, you probably should be cleaning your brushes out. I just, use a bit of warm water, but like, I'm sure there's actual ways you're supposed to take care of your brushes that will help prolong their life. So a little bit more care needed with them. For me, right now, it takes me a little bit longer to use the brush, but I'm pretty sure that this is probably going to change over time, where once I get used to its feel, I'm already starting to see that I'm quicker with the brush than I was back in January, whereas I'm still the quickest with the pen nib, even though it takes time to dry. Another small, not really a con, but much like with the microns, you do need to switch out your brush size if you want to get into finer detail or if you want to do something bigger. That's obvious. I'm not even sure I really count that as a con, but it's a little bit different than with like, you can get a pretty good width with your nib if you push down enough, So one other con, at least for me, while I have tried using the brush for cross hatching and regular hatching, I don't think, at least for me, this is the ideal tool for those techniques. Stippling too, again, at least for me, if I were maybe Seurat and I was painting a huge painting on a big canvas and I could just use my brush to put a dot and another dot and another dot, yeah, I would use it for stippling. But the sites that I'm working in and the brushes that I have, I have found that I haven't really been able to get it down yet. And that's probably more speaks to my skill level versus the tool itself. But it's a con for me, so I'm going to say it. I'm not going to use it for hatching anymore because I tried it and I didn't like it. I haven't really tried it for stippling yet. It might be okay for stippling. I haven't given it a go yet. We'll see. I'll find out at some point. And now for the final results. Drum roll, please. Ta-da! Okay, what do you guys out there think? I feel that the one with the best face, maybe I shouldn't give my opinions, but I'm gonna give my opinions because it's my channel and I'll do whatever I want to do. But yeah, I feel the one with the micron and the technical pens, I think the face on Kana looks best. And again, Kana is from Dark Horse, my free webcomic that's not safe for work. I like the dip pen the best overall, except for the lamb's face. Oh my god, there's something going on with that fucking lamb's face with the dip pen. It's kind of scary looking. Kind of scary, maybe a little bit derpy looking. It's okay though, we love it. It's a lamb, it's adorable. It can look like that, it's fine, it's fine. I really like a lot of the elements with the brush image too, though. The lines feel the thickest on the brush version. Even when I change the line weight, it still feels the thickest on the brush version. And then the next thickest would be, in my opinion, the dip pen. And then finally, the most detailed with there's still line variation, but the most detailed one, I think, has the thinnest lines. And because that's because I had so much control over, which size I used where. Someone else using these exact same tools and techniques probably would have had different results. Not probably, would definitely have had different results. So, yeah, what do y'all think out there? What are your opinions on this? I thought it'd just be fun to kind of demonstrate the differences between these tools when I personally use them, but I am kind of curious what kind of tools you use. How do they differ? Some of y'all are probably using digital programs, and I know that people can download brushes and things. How is that for you? How do you experiment and play around? Because that's a very different thing than what I'm doing here, and I find that fascinating. I'm happy to continue actually combining all these tools. In my personal opinion, I think they work best when I blend them together, learn how to use them, and bring out the virtues of all of these tools. Okay, that's all I got to say about that. I'm starting to ramble now. Next week, I'm going to be doing a top 5 magical girl manga / anime, my personal favorites. They don't have to be your personal favorites, but I'm going to express my favorites and delve into why, and that's why it ended up being a much longer video than I thought it was going to be. If I don't have it next week, it'll be the following week. We'll see how much I get done this weekend. But yeah, the week after that, I intend to do the flip side of that, which is visit my top 5 indie magical girl webcomics. And I'll probably have a Q&A somewhere in there. At the end of the month, I always have the Q&A, so these videos might all be separated, but that's what's to come in the near future. If you like what I do and you feel like throwing some money at me, please do so digitally so that I don't get hurt. Links for that are down in the description. Don't expect too much from me, okay? I do a lot of work and a lot of projects, and with ComicFury Zine, I've got so much on my plate right now. But I'll be talking about ComicFury Zine much more in the months to come. Otherwise, I'm out of here. Peace and love, fare you well, and keep on trucking. Oh my god, that's stiff. Oh my god.